"You're not allowed to have uncut grass over 3 inches, Mr. Monroe," Cynthia snapped, holding her clipboard like it was a badge of honor. "That includes beneath the elm." I didn't flinch. "That elm? The one planted in '74 after my grandma passed? You're standing on the root line, which means you're on our land, not HOA-maintained common property." She blinked, just for a second, enough for the smug to crack. "I rebuilt the boundary wall myself. I know where the markers are buried. And I've got the original survey maps in my truck, so unless your little ruler's backed by the county, we're done here. My name's Mason Monroe. I'm a mechanic, U.S. Air Force trained, grew up 2 blocks over before my parents passed. I moved back to care for my grandfather, Thomas, who's 60 and still walking with more discipline than most people drive. This house, the bench beneath that tree, it's the last living piece of my family line. And Cynthia Hardwick thinks she's going to rip it up over grass length? Not a chance. By the way, where are you watching from? And has your HOA ever tried something this dumb? Stick around, 'cause they pushed the wrong guy this time. Let me explain how this really started. It was a Tuesday. Heat had already turned the front porch into a frying pan by 10 a.m., and Grandpa was sitting out there like he always did, cap tilted back, newspaper folded, and a glass of sweet tea sweating on the table. His oxygen tank rested by his side like a loyal hound. That's when I saw her. Cynthia. She wasn't knocking, she was measuring. I watched her walk along the hedges with a tape measure, scribble something down, and snap a photo of the lawn. Grandpa didn't even notice. "Hey," I called out, stepping off the porch. "Is there something wrong?" She barely looked at me. "Grass height. Property code states no more than 3 inches past curb level. You're in violation." I laughed. I genuinely thought it was a joke. "You're kidding. That tree line hasn't changed in 40 years. That doesn't exempt you." "No," I said, stepping closer, "but what might? The original charter signed in 1982. That's when this house was the only one on the block. Everything else came after. The rules came after." "You're welcome to submit a petition, Mr. Monroe," she said coolly, "but violations will continue to accrue." "Back inside," I told Grandpa. He didn't look up. "She measured the yard?" "Yep." "Did she step near the elm?" "Right on the root line." He nodded once. "That's my line. She's trespassing." Here's the thing most people don't understand. Grandpa Thomas isn't just a veteran. He's a decorated combat medic from Desert Storm, and the reason we have that elm out front is because it was planted in memory of Elise Monroe, his wife, my grandma, who passed away young in a car crash. Every Saturday morning he sits under that tree on the bench they built together. He doesn't talk about it. Doesn't have to. I watched him polish that bench for decades. It was sacred to him. Still is. And now Cynthia was threatening it over grass height? Check the notice again. $75.00. Initial fine, $25.00 per day of non-compliance. That was just the start. The next morning, a yellow violation tag was on the front door. Cracked pavement hazard. Same pavement we've had since 1985. I stepped off the porch, grabbed my phone, and started recording. I wasn't going to let them steamroll this place because it didn't match Cynthia's Stepford vision of community. I'd only been back a few months. I left my job at a military vehicle shop in Colorado to help Grandpa after his fall. Sold my car, moved into the guest room, and I'd figured this place would be quiet, safe. Familiar. It wasn't just about the grass anymore. It was about legacy. And that elm, that bench, those were lines I wasn't about to let them cross. That evening, Grandpa and I sat under it just like we used to. He reached down and ran his hand along the bench edge. I noticed a small scratch, barely visible. "You remember when your grandma carved our initials here?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Yeah, right before you deployed." She said if I didn't come back, this would be our spot, forever. I swallowed hard. That's when I knew this wasn't about the yard. It was about who gets to decide what matters on your land, on your home, over your memories. And I was ready to fight for ours. "Looks like they want a war," I muttered, flipping through the latest violation notice that had been duct taped to our mailbox post. This one was new, unauthorized garden ornamentation. It meant Grandpa's bird bath. The same bird bath that had been there since I was a kid, the one the blue jays nested around every spring. Grandpa didn't even blink when I told him. "She's testing you," he said simply, sipping his tea without looking up. "HOA always pushes until someone pushes back harder. Just gotta decide when to swing." I nodded, but inside I was already boiling. They'd crossed the line from rule enforcement into harassment, and I wasn't about to let them peck at us piece by piece. I grabbed my phone and started documenting everything: the yard, the tree, the driveway, even the stupid bird bath. If they were going to keep piling on, I was going to build a file thick enough to choke a judge. Across the street, a curtain shifted. Mr. Harold Denton, retired postal inspector. HOA treasurer, technically. But I hadn't seen him at a single board walk-around. He was always on his porch with a book, alone, his face tight like he was constantly biting down on some truth. That day, when our eyes met, he didn't look away, just paused like he wanted to say something. His hand trembled slightly as he raised it halfway, then dropped it and went back inside. That was the first moment I realized not everyone on the board believed in Cynthia's crusade, but fear, it does strange things to people, especially in neighborhoods run by a woman who treats her power like a private militia. The next morning, we got a letter. Certified mail, Cynthia's signature at the bottom. Notice of intent to escalate. Continued violations may result in lien action or forced compliance. They were threatening eviction over grass and a bird bath. I felt the heat rise up my spine, but Grandpa, he just set the letter down, folded it once, and stared at the elm through the window. "I didn't give 25 years to this country," he said, voice low, "just to be evicted by a woman with a clipboard." That's when I knew this wasn't just my fight. This was ours, and it went deeper than lawn rules. Back in my garage, I dusted off an old army footlocker, Grandpa's. I had a vague memory of it being sealed tight when I moved back in, like it wasn't to be opened unless there was no other option. I didn't open it then, but I glanced at it long enough to remember that the past might hold more weapons than I thought. I spent the afternoon mapping out the HOA charter, line by line, found the clauses, looked up precedents. Turns out, Cynthia's overreach wasn't just annoying, it was illegal in a few spots. The bird bath rule, not enforceable unless it blocked foot traffic. The lawn height metric, subjective unless it interfered with neighbors' sightlines, which ours didn't. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd worked enough logistics in the Air Force to know how to track a paper trail. Bureaucracy was just combat in slow motion. That night, I filed an appeal. 3 copies, one for Cynthia, one for the county clerk, one for our records. Sent it with tracking. At the bottom of the form, I wrote in all caps, "Be at the board meeting." 2 hours later, the motion sensor light by the shed clicked on. I peeked out the window. Nothing, just the sway of a trash bin knocked slightly off kilter. But something was different. The feeling, like someone was watching, like someone knew I'd stopped playing defense. Back on the porch, Grandpa lit a cigar. First time I'd seen him do that in months. "You stir up the hornet's nest?" he asked. "Little bit." He took a puff. "Good, they forget whose land this is." Behind him, the elm rustled. A breeze passed, and for a moment, it felt like something old, something strong, had just woken up again. The porch boards creaked under Grandpa's weight as he eased himself into the rocking chair. "Feels like 68 again," he muttered. "Only now the war's got roses and deed restrictions." I sat beside him, scrolling through the HOA bylaws I'd printed, pen in hand, highlighting anything that smelled like overreach. But my thoughts kept drifting back to Harold Denton. His twitchy hand, that silent nod. He wasn't just scared, he was burdened, like he knew something he couldn't say. Yet, a knock pulled me from the page. It wasn't Cynthia. It was Janice Miller, our neighbor 2 doors down. Widow, mid-60s, ran the bake sales until the HOA cut the funding. She stood on the porch with a covered dish and eyes like she'd been crying. "Your grandfather home?" she asked quietly. "It's just inside." She hesitated, looked back over her shoulder, then stepped forward. "Can I sit a moment?" We shared banana bread in silence until she finally spoke. "They fined me $400.00, said my porch railing paint was faded." "That's ridiculous," I said. She nodded. "I repainted it last year." Cynthia walked around with a ruler and a flashlight. "She's pushing people, especially the ones who don't push back." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Janice swallowed. Because you pushed back. And I think they're scared of what happens if more people like you start talking. Her hands trembled as she pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. This came across the board email. I wasn't supposed to see it. It was a printed thread. HOA internal correspondence. Cynthia's name in bold at the top. Halfway down, a phrase jumped out. Target high-risk properties. Start with veterans, elderly, less resistance, cleaner legal optics. I froze. Veterans, elderly, Grandpa. I looked up. Did Harold see this? Janice nodded slowly. He didn't say a word, just slid it across the table and left early. My jaw tightened. Harold was scared. But he wasn't gone. He was sending signals. That night, I walked the sidewalk route Cynthia always took on her compliance patrols. Her SUV was parked crooked in her driveway. Classic. I checked my voice recorder tucked in my jacket. I don't care if he's got medals or memory loss, she snapped into her Bluetooth headset as she got out. Rules are rules. If they don't want notices, they shouldn't buy homes in governed communities. She looked right at me as I passed, then scoffed. You again, still pretending the birdbath is sacred? I kept walking. Didn't say a word, but my hand tapped my pocket where the recorder buzzed lightly, capturing everything. Back home, Grandpa was at the kitchen table, carefully folding a newspaper like he was preparing for battle. Janice came by, I said. She gave me something. His eyes flicked up. They're profiling us, huh? He didn't flinch, just set the paper down. They don't think we'll fight. Manley will soon. Grandpa pushed the paper toward me. An obituary circled in pen. Roger Elkins, former HOA board chair, deceased 2 months ago. That's the man who wrote the last version of the bylaws, Grandpa said. Fair guy, hated what the board was turning into. I think he kept records. Letters, maybe. Cynthia took over right after he died. A pulse of hope kicked in my chest. Where would he keep something like that? Probably locked up. He had a detached garage, used it like an office. The wheels were turning. A new lead, a new reason to dig deeper. We weren't alone anymore. Janice was cracking, Harold was watching, and Cynthia? She was slipping, letting her mask down in private, not knowing the mic was rolling. The quiet ones were waking up. This wasn't just about grass length, this was a cleansing campaign, dress-coded tyranny. And we were done staying quiet. Have you or someone you love been bullied by an HOA, hiding behind fine print? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your story deserves to be heard too. She's bluffing, I muttered, staring down at the violation slip posted on Grandpa's door like it was a warning shot. Grass exceeding height limit by 2.5 inches, final notice before community hearing, signed neatly, Judith Calloway, HOA president. Grandpa stood behind me, his arms crossed like he was back in boot camp, eyes hard but silent. I could feel him clenching his jaw, the way he used to when Mom brought up his VA paperwork. She keeps leaving these, I said, waving the yellow slip, but no one else has long got one, not Tim's, not Nora's. Grandpa didn't reply. Instead, he nodded toward the porch swing. It creaked in the wind, empty now, but it used to be where Grandma read the paper, while he trimmed the yard with precision that only came from someone who used to iron his socks. She's not after grass, he finally said. She's after control. And that's when I knew we weren't dealing with a neighborhood dispute. We were dealing with someone who got drunk on authority. Inside, I set the notice on the counter next to a stack of other violations. Flag too low, paint too faded, hose visible on weekdays, each one more absurd than the last. I opened my laptop, eyes narrowing. Let's talk strategy, I said. Grandpa raised a brow. You're not letting this go? You kidding? You marched across Europe for this land. I'll handle Judith. And by handle, I meant dig. I started combing through HOA records. A few PDFs on the website were public, but most of the juicy stuff, meeting notes, spending logs, were buried. Password protected, restricted to board members. Which was odd because, according to the bylaws, financial documents had to be accessible to any homeowner on request. But when I clicked request, I got a message that chilled me more than a cease and desist. Access denied. Contact President Calloway for approval. I leaned back, heart thudding. That's not just shady, that's illegal. Across the street, porch lights blinked on as dusk settled over Cedar Springs. I saw Nora out front again, her watering can trembling slightly in her hand. She glanced at me, then quickly looked away like she'd seen a ghost. She was Judith's secretary. I made a note of that. Next morning, Grandpa's grass had been slashed low, but not by us. He stormed outside, nostrils flared. I followed the lines in the soil, jagged, sloppy, as if done by someone in a hurry. Tire marks led from the curb. "Judith's crew?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just pointed. A surveillance camera hidden beneath the gutter, one he'd installed years ago after a neighbor's car got keyed. I ran inside to check the feed, and there it was, 2:18 a.m. A black SUV, two men, one with hedge shears, another on lookout. But it wasn't just the trimming that caught my eye. One of them taped something to our mailbox afterward. I paused the footage, blew it up. It was another notice. I printed the screenshot and stuck it on the fridge like a war map. "I'm bringing this to the community board," I said. "They're the board," Grandpa replied. "It's her and her two friends. You'll just give her more ammo. Then I'll find a way around him." Just then there was a knock. Nora stood at the door wringing her hands. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Then why are you?" I asked. Her eyes flicked to Grandpa, then back to me. "I didn't sign off on that grass violation. Neither did Tim. Judith's been filing these without quorum, even forging initials. She keeps saying it's for neighborhood standards. But..." She hesitated. "But what?" "She's planning to evict. There's already a motion drafted. It's not just about the yard anymore." Grandpa stepped forward. "They want to take my home?" Nora nodded. I thought you should know." She left just as fast as she came, her hands trembling the way mine did when I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about rewriting them. The silence after Nora left was thick, like the air right before a storm. "She's scared," I said. Grandpa nodded once. "And rightly so. Judith's not just drunk on power. She's weaponizing it." We sat there for a beat, letting the weight of it settle in. Then Grandpa stood, his steps slow but deliberate, and disappeared into the hallway. I followed him. He stopped at the old hall closet, the one we hadn't touched since Grandma passed. The door stuck like always, and the hinges whined in protest. Inside, a stack of weather-worn boxes, half collapsed under their own age. "You really think she can take your house?" I asked. He didn't answer, just pulled out a box marked VA Correspondence 1982199 in faint black marker. He set it on the kitchen table and pried it open with a pocket knife. The scent hit me first. Dust, mildew, paper that had lived too many summers. Then came the clink, metals, tags, and a rusted key. "What's this for?" I asked. Grandpa took the key, squinting at it. "Back shed. The one your grandmother always kept locked, said there were important family things inside. I never asked." "Why not?" He shrugged. "Some doors we didn't open unless we had to." Now felt like that time. Outside, wind had picked up. The trees swayed like they were whispering. We crossed the backyard to the shed. An old cedar thing with vines clawing up the sides like nature wanted it back. I unlocked it. The door creaked wide, revealing dust, cobwebs, and a tangle of forgotten years. But in the back, under a moth-eaten sheet, was a cedar trunk, carved into it. "Cedar Springs Deeds and Originals." I blinked. "Is this real?" Grandpa was quiet. We dragged it out together. Inside, maps, newspaper clippings, faded property surveys, and then sealed in a thick plastic sleeve. An original community charter, signed and dated by the developers of Cedar Springs in 1964. And here's where it got wild. Buried deep on the third page, veteran households permanently exempt from cosmetic code violations. Handwritten amendment, not typed, not copied. My heart thudded. I looked at Grandpa. "You were the first resident on this block. You are the exemption." His laugh was bitter. "And Judith, been walking all over it." That night, I scanned every document, creating a digital backup in case the originals mysteriously disappeared. I circled, highlighted, annotated. Every page connected a piece of the puzzle. How the HOA evolved, when control shifted from developers to elected residents, and how Judith and her little regime slid in during a 5-person election no one even remembered. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A woman's voice, hushed and shaky. "It's Nora. You didn't get this from me, but check meeting minutes from May 2022, page 6. She hung up. I opened the HOA archive again. Most minutes were stripped down. Summary points, vague bullet items, but May 2022, there was a redacted section at the bottom, almost like it had been intentionally cropped. But Google's a funny thing. A cached version from months ago still existed. I clicked. The full note read, "Motion proposed by Judith Calloway to revise grandfathered exemptions, specifically those tied to historical veteran residency status. Motion passed without full quorum. No homeowner notice sent." I leaned back in my chair. My stomach dropped. "She rewrote history," I muttered. "Illegally." Grandpa looked up from the couch, holding the photo of him and Grandma beside the porch swing. His voice cracked a little. "This house. This lawn. I kept it alive for her. For you. This isn't just grass." "I know," I said, my voice low. "It's legacy, and now it was time to go on offense. I'm not gonna let her erase my name from this land," Grandpa muttered, staring at the old survey map now pinned to the kitchen wall. His fingers traced the inked line that marked the boundary of our property, thicker than the others, drawn with stubborn permanence. It was past midnight, but sleep wasn't even in the conversation. The discovery of the veteran exemption and that rigged 2022 vote had lit a fire neither of us could put out. I pulled my laptop closer. "We've got the original charter, scanned and dated. I backed it up to 3 different clouds. And Nora's tip, it checks out. They passed that motion illegally. No homeowner notifications, no quorum. That's grounds for reversal." Grandpa chuckled, dry and sharp. "Funny thing about dictators, they always overreach." I nodded toward the porch. "You ready?" He grabbed his old bomber jacket, the one with the frayed patch over the heart, the one Grandma stitched herself before he'd deployed. Been ready for 60 years. We stepped outside. The air was crisp, one of those quiet neighborhood nights where everything seems still until it's not. Judith was at it again. Flashlight in hand, she stood across the street with 2 other board members, Leonard from Lot 12 and Candace from Lot 8. Clipboard in one hand, phone camera in the other, whispering, taking notes. "They always pick the shadows," Grandpa said under his breath. This time, I had a surprise for them. A small, almost invisible IR camera hidden in the oak tree out front. Motion synced to my phone. "Smile," I whispered. A quiet click buzzed in my pocket. Inside, I pulled up the live feed, their voices caught clearly. "Judith, we'll fine him again. He's past the grace period. Doesn't matter what papers he waves." Leonard, "But are we covered? That exemption clause." Judith cut in. "Doesn't apply. I took care of it last year." Candace, "I'm not signing off if it's not airtight." Judith snapped, "You already did." We saved the recording, 3 separate backups. That next morning, Grandpa was on a mission. He stood at the old shed, tugging free a canvas tarp from the rafters. Underneath, the rusted metal lawn sign from the 1980s, "Welcome Home, Sergeant Whitlock." Bent in the middle, but legible, he straightened it, cleaned it, planted it near the mailbox. I grabbed a Sharpie and scribbled one more line beneath it on a white board. "VA Charter Exemption 1964, filed, bound, valid." Neighbors slowed as they passed. Some honked in quiet support, others didn't make eye contact. But one SUV stopped. Nora stepped out. She looked pale. "I shouldn't be here," she said quickly, "but I saw your sign." I nodded. "We know what she did. We've got the paperwork. And the recording." Nora glanced around, lowered her voice. "If she finds out I helped, she'll retaliate. She always does." "Then help us finish this," I said. "Get us the meeting transcripts, the ones that weren't uploaded. I know they exist. Judith's sloppy but not stupid. She documents everything." Her eyes flicked to Grandpa, standing tall beside the sign. I remember that sign, she whispered. I was 6. My dad helped make it. Her voice cracked. Tell him I'm sorry for everything. She left without another word. Later that night, I walked to the back shed alone. Something about the quiet pulled me there. Inside, I sat on the edge of that old cedar trunk, the one Grandma had guarded so tightly. I opened it again. Beneath the maps, letters, and documents was a small wooden box I hadn't noticed before, untouched, smooth as glass. Inside, an old Polaroid. Grandpa and Grandma, young, barefoot, sitting on the porch swing freshly installed, a handwritten note on the back. This land means peace. Don't let anyone take that from us. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. They tried to fine him over a few inches of grass. They had no idea what they were actually mowing down. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Let's show them this fight isn't about lawn height. It's about respect. I could still smell the mildew from that cabinet. The paper where Grandpa had scribbled S1 protocol was curled, stained, and barely legible. But it was enough. I knew what I had. And more importantly, I knew who I needed to show it to. I stepped outside into the sharp dusk air. Lights flickered across the cul-de-sac like blinking lies. Across the street, Terry stood motionless near his mailbox again, pretending to fiddle with junk mail. Third time this week, same routine. You got something to say, Terry? I called, not even trying to sound polite. His hand froze mid-rip. Then slowly, like it hurt to move, he walked toward me. I shouldn't be doing this, he muttered. But I saw what they did to your granddad, the meeting last spring. What Helen said, it didn't sit right. Which part, I asked, the part where they fined a war vet for grass, or the part where they called the code officer and didn't even give us 24 hours? Terry swallowed hard. The part where she laughed about it, said he was a stubborn relic with a lawn to match. That wasn't a confession, it was a gut punch, but I kept my cool. Why are you telling me now? His eyes darted toward the end of the street, where Helen's porch light cast its fake golden glow like a crown. Because I saw her checking your backyard this morning. She's planning something else. And that paper you found. S1 protocol? My dad used to mention that in passing, back in the Gulf. My heart kicked in my chest. You know what it means? He nodded slowly. It's how they rerouted comms under civilian radar. Means Grandpa was part of classified logistics, probably managed property staging or tactical intel offsite. That changes everything. Exactly what I needed. Terry, I said carefully, you're gonna help me make this right. His head shook before his mouth did. I can't. My wife's on the board. I'm not asking you to testify. Just give me what you overheard. Anything you remember from those meetings. He hesitated, but eventually nodded once, shaky. You didn't hear it from me, but they're talking about retroactive property line audits, trying to dig up old violations to stack a case. Helen's pushing to involve the county assessor. Retroactive, that meant they weren't just targeting Grandpa's lawn, they wanted the whole damn yard, probably the shed too. I spent the next day compiling everything. Veteran ID, letters from the city proving zoning grandfather clauses, and now, with Terry's info, notes from that old S1 document. I highlighted the chain of command, showing my grandfather's role wasn't just field service. It involved off-base housing staging. And tucked behind that, I included photos of that tree again, the one he planted after his first deployment, our family bench still there. Still rooted. Still his. The next step, legal muscle. I drove to Wren Hollow, 2 towns over. There's a woman named Joyce Fletcher, retired paralegal, now running a document prep service out of a pink bungalow. She used to work for the county's land records office, and people said if anyone knew how to find holes in HOA claims, it was Joyce. I handed her the packet. She flipped through it quietly for about 5 minutes. Then she looked up and grinned. They're screwing with the wrong veteran. Think it's enough? I asked. Oh, honey, she said, tapping the S1 page. This right here? This qualifies him for a preservation exemption under the 1985 Civil Relief Property Protection Clause. It's obscure, but it still applies. You're serious? She nodded. We'll draft a cease and desist. If they push harder, we go federal. Walking out of her office, my stomach settled for the first time in weeks. This wasn't just personal anymore, it was tactical. Back home, Grandpa was sitting on the porch, polishing a coin with his thumb. The same old silver dollar he'd carried through 2 tours. "Still got it?" I asked. He held it up. "Never leaves my pocket." I dropped the paperwork in his lap. "Neither does this." He read for a while, then leaned back, eyes watery but unblinking. "I don't want revenge," he said quietly. "Just my name back." "You'll get that," I told him, "but they're gonna know exactly why." The wind shifted that evening, not metaphorically, literally. The air dropped 10 degrees and carried the scent of something wet and raw. Maybe it was nerves, or maybe it was the smell of the neighborhood starting to sweat under pressure. Either way, I could feel it in my bones. This was the part of the story where you stop reacting and start laying traps. I waited until Helen's porch light flicked off around 10:17 p.m., exactly the same time it had for the past 5 nights. She was routine obsessed. Same 2 poodles yapping in the yard, same hummingbird feeder, same glass of lemon water by the recliner. Predictable. And that's when I brought out the recording device. I'd already stashed a parabolic mic behind our dogwood tree, pointed right at her patio. Legal? Barely. Ethical? I'll let the judge decide. But if they were plotting to build a legal case using forged inspections or bad faith assessments, I needed them in their own words. By 10:42 p.m. I had something. "Just claim it's non-compliance retroactive to the 99 a.m. amendment," a voice said. Not Helen. Male. Raspy. Probably Doug Kramer, the treasurer. "Nobody reads that clause anyway." Kramer's body had been scattered, smoke drifting into the open. Helen replied, smug and matter-of-fact. "He'll be gone by Labor Day. Evicting a veteran doesn't play well in court, so we'll encourage him with liens, quietly." And there it was. Strategy. Intent. Proof. I shut off the mic, heart pounding like I'd just run a sprint. Grandpa was asleep inside, but I sat on the porch for another hour, staring at the shed, the old tree, the dented bench that had outlived 5 HOA presidents. They wanted him gone not because of grass, but because they saw him as dead weight, old, uncooperative, disposable. Next morning, I looped in Joyce. She listened to the recording, face unreadable. When it ended, she said, "You ready for the nuke?" "Nuke?" I asked. She nodded. "We hit them at the upcoming board meeting, publicly. But to do that, we need their bylaw revisions and meeting minutes for the last 3 years. Let me guess, not online." "Nope, locked file cabinet in the rec center office, but if you have a membership card..." "I still do. And if you happen to have a reason to be there after hours..." "Got it." I left that afternoon with gloves, a flashlight, and an old key card. The rec center hadn't changed much since I was 12. Same vending machine with stale gum, same dusty trophy case of neighborhood cook-offs. The office? Locked, but not deadbolt locked, just the kind of lock a determined grandson with a butter knife and a quiet grudge could finesse open. Inside, I found the cabinet, bottom drawer, misfiled, but there it was. Meeting minutes showed Helen had rewritten the enforcement clause last year, specifically removing the grandfather exemption for homeowners over 60. A direct hit. If we proved she did that with a conflict of interest, say to target someone specific, it wouldn't just nullify her fines, it could get her booted from the board. I snapped photos of every page. Back home, I sat with Grandpa again. This time, I handed him both stacks, the S1 paperwork and now the smoking gun minutes. He didn't look at them right away. Instead, he asked me something I didn't expect. "You remember the story about that tree?" he said. I nodded. "You told me you planted it after your last deployment, said it was proof something could survive storms." He smiled. "I also said I'd never leave this house unless they carried me out." "They won't," I promised. "You built this place, now I'm going to help you defend it." He didn't cry, but something shifted in his posture, like the weight of those military years, those quiet mornings tending a lawn he thought he might lose, finally lifted. Joyce said we needed to hit them hard but not blind, and she was right. This wasn't just about exposing Helen and Doug, it was about removing the cancer without infecting the whole neighborhood. The problem was, we were up against people who operated like shadows in daylight, quiet, polite, and vicious with a smile. They'd spent years papering over their wrongs with procedure and jargon. That meant our evidence couldn't just be right, it had to be undeniable. Which is how I ended up sitting in front of my old law school buddy Devin Park, with a thumb drive and a list of questions that made him raise both eyebrows. "Hold up, you recorded them without consent?" he asked, leaning back in his creaky office chair. "In a public-facing backyard, they were projecting. I didn't tamper, just documented." He smirked. "That'll hold up? Barely. But combine it with the bylaw tampering and you might have something." Devin had left trial law to run a private legal strategy firm. Translation, he was exactly the kind of guy who loved making entitled bureaucrats sweat. "Here's what you need," he said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. "Public confrontation at the next HOA meeting. Deliver everything. Audio, copies of the rewritten bylaws, even the old enforcement clauses. But don't present it like revenge. Make it about fairness, community safety, due process." I nodded, my brain already scripting out the flow. Devin leaned in. "And remember, the only thing Helen and Doug fear more than exposure is exposure with an audience." By the time I got back home, Grandpa was sitting out front polishing the brass plate on his military box, the one he'd brought out during their first threat of eviction. That box hadn't left the bench in days. Neither had he. I told him about Devin, about the plan. He listened quietly, then said, "You do what you need to do. Just make sure it means something." That night, I met Joyce again behind the rec center. She handed me a folder, thin but heavy with weight. "Anonymous complaints," she said. "Half of them are copy-pasted, and the signatures? Look closer." I held the pages up to the porch light. They're all written by Helen. Different names, same pen pressure, same phrasing. Joyce nodded. "Forgery." Why would she do this? To pad her numbers, justify crackdowns, make it seem like there's community pressure when it's just her vendetta. That was the breaking point. The next morning, I stopped by the old shed behind the house, Grandpa's sacred place. I hadn't been in there in years, but there, behind a stack of broken tools and tarp-covered crates, I found something unexpected. A framed letter, presidential seal, dated 1969, for meritorious service. My throat tightened. He'd never shown it to anyone, never used it to prove his worth, but now I realized this wasn't just a legal fight, it was personal. About a man who'd spent his life serving, only to be cornered by paper tyrants with HOA badges. The stage was set. I scanned, copied, and organized everything. Audio files, bylaws, fake complaint signatures, the old enforcement clause, and yes, the presidential letter. It wasn't just evidence, it was armor. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday, 2 days from now. Word had already spread that something big was coming. I could feel the tension humming under the neighborhood like live wire under dry grass. Helen sent out a community update email that morning, her tone syrupy but sharp. "Let's ensure respectful decorum during this week's meeting. Disruption will not be tolerated." Cute. Doug, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding behind tax codes and liability clauses. But I wasn't hiding anymore. This time, I was coming with paperwork. And unlike them, I didn't need to lie to win. If you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA or watched someone you love get pushed around for no good reason, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We see you, you're not alone, and this fight, it's for all of us. The air in that hall was thick, like sweat and sawdust. I could feel every eye on Grandpa as he stood up, slow but steady, his folder clutched in one hand and his cane in the other. Across the room, Marion blinked like she didn't recognize him without a lawnmower. "This board will not be bullied by theatrics," she said flatly, trying to shift the mood back in her favor. But Grandpa wasn't here for performance. He set the folder on the table with a soft thud, opened it, and slid one yellowed paper forward. "Page 1, I said from behind him. "Vietnam, Purple Heart." Gasps rippled. Marion's smile strained. "This isn't about—" "Page 2, I interrupted. "Discharge with honors, 32 years, active duty. That's 3 decades of defending the Constitution. The same one this board conveniently forgot includes private property rights." "You're making this political." "No," I said. "You made it personal." I stepped up beside Grandpa and locked eyes with her. Eviction over grass height. After warnings, fines, and threats. That's not enforcement. That's harassment. She scoffed. "You're mischaracterizing policy." Let's go over your policy then, I snapped. I pulled out a copy of the revised bylaws, the same one her vice president had handed me weeks ago, and slapped a bookmarked section. Section 4.7c. Exceptions for health and disability shall be granted with written proof. Grandpa's doctor's note was already paperclipped to the page. Silence. From the back of the room, someone coughed. I looked over. It was Henry Reyes, the conflicted neighbor from Part 3. He'd barely spoken during any of the meetings, but now he stood, knuckles white, around a folded sheet of paper. I wasn't going to say anything, he muttered, voice shaking, but I saw it. I saw Marion approve that same exemption for a board member's brother, last summer. Marion's mouth parted. Henry, that's out of context. No, he said, louder this time, it's not. He passed me the document. Internal HOA memo, stamped and signed, clear as day. That was the crack. You ever feel a room tip, like it shifts its weight all at once? The audience turned. Neighbors once silent, suddenly murmuring. Their frustration had a direction now. Wait, that's true? Someone near the back asked. She waived that rule for her own family? This board isn't impartial. I had my porch repainted because she said it didn't match the theme, but her cousin's place has a mural. The voices grew louder, angrier, real. Grandpa leaned toward me. Let them speak, son. Let them see. I stood tall. We're not here just for 1 yard. We're here because this HOA forgot who it serves, not itself, the community. I turned back to Marion. And as of now, I'm invoking a full audit of all board decisions from the past 3 years. You can't just... Yes, I can, I said, holding up the signed petition from last week, with 38 verified homeowner signatures, more than the minimum required under Article 6. We're forcing a vote to dissolve the board pending investigation. The room exploded, not with rage, but with applause. Marion froze like she didn't expect the rules to be used against her. I suggest, I added, you start packing your office, because come next meeting this board is over. She didn't speak. Just turned, jaw clenched, and walked out the side door like a storm cloud with nowhere to strike. Outside, the crowd spilled into the evening light, neighbors patting Grandpa's shoulder, shaking his hand, thanking him. One even offered to mow his lawn just out of respect. He just smiled and said, I didn't serve this country for applause. I did it so people like you could live free and unbothered. That night, back home, he finally sat on the old bench by the oak tree. Same spot where he'd taught me how to whittle when I was 9. Same place he'd told me the story of his first deployment. The moonlight filtered through the branches like it remembered him. Feels like we're not just fighting a board, he murmured. Feels like we're fighting for how people treat each other. I sat beside him, heart still pounding from everything that had just gone down. Yeah, I said, but we're not alone. The next week moved like wet cement, slow, thick, and full of tension you could cut with a dull butter knife. The vote to dissolve the HOA board was scheduled for Thursday night, and by Tuesday flyers had made their way into every mailbox. Handwritten notes appeared in our screen door. Thank you for standing up for us. About time someone challenged her. I'm bringing my whole family to that meeting. Grandpa didn't say much, but I noticed he stood straighter, moved with a little more ease. The weight pressing on him all summer had started to lift, but the battle wasn't over yet. That Thursday evening, the community center's lot was full. Cars lined the street. Some folks brought folding chairs. Others stood shoulder to shoulder in the back hallway just to hear what was coming. Inside, Marion was already seated at the long table, flanked by the remaining board members, 2 of them visibly anxious, one aggressively chewing his pen cap like it owed him rent. The murmur died when I stepped up to the microphone. I didn't need a speech. The moment already spoke loud enough. I simply held up a copy of the HOA charter. This meeting, I said calmly, has been called in accordance with Article 6, subsection D, homeowner cleared in dissolution proceedings. Which, Marion cut in, her voice tight, doesn't guarantee removal. No, I said, it guarantees a vote. That's happening tonight. A few claps echoed. Someone shouted, "Let's go!" I nodded toward the table. But before we vote, I think the people deserve to hear how the board's been operating. Selectively applying penalties, issuing threats without legal basis, and waiving rules for friends. Marion folded her arms. That's hearsay. It's documented. I reached into my folder and pulled out 3 sheets. The memo Henry Reyes handed me. A neighbor's invoice for $600, 0 cents in fines issued the same day a board member's house failed inspection but wasn't cited. And an audio file, quiet, but clear enough to hear Marion say to her vice president, "Honestly, we just need to make life uncomfortable for him until he leaves." That last one hit like a dropped hammer. The room fell deathly silent. Even her own board members shifted away from her. "You recorded me?" she gasped. "No," I said. "Your neighbor did. Turns out they didn't appreciate being part of a whispered campaign. They just needed someone to give them the courage to step forward." Gasps, a few stunned chuckles. I saw Mrs. Ramirez near the front mouthing, "Wow," like a prayer. And that's when Grandpa stood up. No cane, no paper in hand, just himself. "I fought for this country," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Not so people could be punished for growing tomatoes or letting a patch of grass grow when their back gave out." He turned to Marion. "Your rules aren't the problem. It's how you used them, to push people around, not protect the community. You forgot the difference." A woman in the back wiped a tear from her cheek. I turned to the crowd. "The motion on the floor is to dissolve the current board and hold new elections next month. All in favor?" Hands shot up like wildfire. Outnumbered 3-1, maybe 4. Marion stood, face pale, mouth trembling, but she didn't say a word. She just gathered her folder and walked out, heels clicking fast across the tile. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter, brighter. People stood around chatting, some already forming a volunteer list for the interim HOA committee. I overheard plans for a community cookout. Someone mentioned starting a garden club. It was like the neighborhood had finally exhaled. Grandpa didn't say much as we walked home, just looked up at the sky and muttered, "Damn, stars finally came out." We didn't say much that night. The house felt different. Warmer, like it had finally settled after a long trimmer. Grandpa turned off the porch light, the one Marion once said didn't meet design code, and stood for a moment just staring across the lawn. The same grass she'd tried to weaponize against him. And now it was just grass again. The next morning, he handed me a rusted key. "This is for the shed," he said, clearing his throat like he was trying not to sound too serious. "Figure you earned it." I hadn't been in there in years, not since before Grandma passed. I remembered it as more memory than structure, a leaning thing stuffed with tools and sawdust ghosts. But when I opened the door, the scent of pine and old motor oil hit me like a wave, and tucked along the back wall, covered in a thin wool sheet, was the bench. Grandma's bench, faded blue, one armrest half sanded where she'd meant to repaint it but never did. A photo of the two of them was still taped inside the lid of the little box beneath. They used to sit there every summer evening, drinking sweet tea and yelling at the squirrels like they owned rent. I sat down on it now, and for a minute, everything else fell away. That shed, that bench, it wasn't just storage, it was time. It was every fight they'd fought to keep their space, their pace. It was dignity preserved. Later that week, the new HOA interim board held a barbecue on the green. People brought homemade chili, cornbread, lemonade in recycled jars. Kids ran wild. Henry Reyes even manned the grill, flipping burgers like he'd never hesitated in the first place. Marion didn't show. Her house sat dark, for sale sign already up. The community didn't need revenge, it just needed space to breathe. As the sun dropped, Grandpa wandered over, leaning on the cane he refused to replace. "Told you that shed still had use," he mumbled, watching the kids chase each other with glow sticks. "It's where we built the first birdhouse. Your grandma and I used to sneak out there, pretend we were building something important just so we could hide from HOA paperwork." He chuckled, the way he hadn't in months. I looked at the crowd, then back at him. "You think it's over?" He shrugged. Doesn't need to be some big finish. Sometimes just outlasting them is enough." That night, I added something to the inside of the bench lid, taped next to Grandma's photo. A copy of the HOA charter, signed and corrected with our names at the bottom. A symbol. A receipt. Proof we didn't just survive. We changed something. And honestly, that was all I needed. Sometimes the smallest patch of grass means more than a whole city block, because it holds memory, identity, defiance. And when someone tries to take that, they're not just trimming hedges or handing out fines, they're cutting at roots. But roots run deep when you've fought for them. Let 'em write their rules, Grandpa muttered that night, sitting back down on that old blue bench. Some of us lived long enough to write better ones. Have you ever had to fight back against unfair HOA rules, or seen a neighbor do it with quiet strength? Drop your story or even just where you're watching from. We read every comment. Let's remind them, community isn't built on control. It's built on respect.